¿Has visto que bien seguimos tus instrucciones? Empezamos bien. We are really clever and brilliant people.
Tenim loteria de s'estel, si voleu loteria, després quan s'acaba. El número guanyador, Sí. 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 A ver, vale, ok. Simplemente decir que Su va a hacer su presentación primero. Os recomendamos que las preguntas que tengáis las apuntéis para hacer sesión de preguntas después. A no ser que haya algo que digas, no entiendo, ¿vale? Y esto me impide continuar. Entonces, sí, levanta la mano y hacemos la pregunta en el momento. ¿Os parece bien?
Ara sí que començarem. Heu pagat la novetada. El que vos deia, benvinguts i vos agraïm que hagueu vengut en aquests dos tallers que el que pretenen és aprofundir a dins els dos eixos principals en els quals se fonamenten les jornades de demà, que és innovacions a dins l'àmbit terapèutic i innovacions i noves formes de fer, nous models de lluita contra l'estigma. Per tant, avui tenim nosaltres Sue Baker, que és la directora de Time to Change, és tota una personalitat a dins l'àmbit de la lluita contra l'estigma, no només a nivell europeu, sinó mundial. Per tant, és una oportunitat única d'estar avui amb ell i d'aprendre moltes coses. I després, a les 5, vendrà el Jaco Seipula, 5 un poquet més, mirem amb un pot de retras, per aprofundir a dins la metodologia de diàleg obert. Una informació de servei que me comuniquen que vos transmeti és que demà, per favor, transmeteu a tots els companys que hagin de venir demà a la jornada que a les 8:30 des de matí s'obrin les acreditacions i a les 8:30 des de matí tots han de ser aquí per evitar després retrasos. S'ha d'aparcar en els pàrquings 4 i 5 que estan a baix i pujar a peu. Per tant, veniu en temps, per favor, transmeteu aquest missatge a tots els companys de les entitats. I doncs, sense més preàmbul, endavant.
Muchas gracias. Thank you for the invitation to speak today and tomorrow. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I have never been to Mallorca. I've been to Menorca once. Is it working? Can you hear? Okay. I've been here less than 24 hours, and I think already fallen in love with this island. So you're very lucky to live in such a beautiful part of the world. There is a lot of information which I want to share, but we only have so much time. So what I'm going to do is take you through some of the areas of a very, very big program that we set up in England 11 years ago now, and is similar. Everything's different. Everything is different in different cultures and contexts, but some of the core principles of effective anti-stigma work are shared and are common across the world and in many income settings. I'll tell you a little bit more about our new work in Africa and Asia just at the end. But what I want to take you through is some of the ways that we've been shifting society in the UK and in other parts of the world. I'm lucky to be here. It was Victoria who is part of our Global Anti-Stigma Alliance, where people running campaigns similar to ours come together. And I think you have some of the ingredients for social change here in Mallorca, but I think more is needed. And I hope that being here will help inspire and advocate for more focus and more investment and more energy to combat stigma and discrimination of mental health. I have been passionate about what I call a very big social injustice, which is the stigma of mental health, for the best part of 3 decades now. And we have only started to see significant change in the last 7 or 8 years. But we are the most evidence program in the world with the best evidence that things have improved. But one word of warning, we don't have all the answers. People in their own countries, you have the answers. We can just help share what's worked in our country and worked in some other countries. But you are the experts in what can help change society in the Balearic Islands. So if something doesn't make sense, put your hand up, use your microphone, and I'll try and explain with some help. If things aren't translating. But other than that, I'll take most questions at the end, and we can have enough time for proper discussion. There might be things I haven't covered where I have got more information to share that might be useful. Okay, so I'm going to start. You okay at the back? Okay, they were okay. Okay, let's start. Oh, that's gone a bit wonky. So, stigma and discrimination that surrounds mental health is as damaging, if not more damaging, than the symptoms of the mental health problem itself. That's what people in our networks, our jargon is the same as your jargon. We talk about people with lived experience, people who happen to have had or have mental health problems. The vast majority of people in England, we know this from research, have experienced discrimination from many areas of life: family, friends, neighbours, employers, colleagues, in at least one area of life. It is a very common experience. And what the majority of people say in our networks, and this isn't independent research, this is people in our networks, so it's not an independent piece of research. But that second statistic, that the majority say that stigma is as bad, if not worse, than the mental illness, just shows you how damaging it can be to be excluded from so many walks of life. So even if you don't think about this as a social justice issue, this is better outcomes for everyone that you're working with. If you're working with people as professionals, if you don't address the wider stigma and discrimination that surrounds our lives, people won't have better outcomes. It's not all about medication. It's not all about treatment. It's about being included in societies is good for everyone's mental health and well-being. Not having a job, not having an income, not having a relationship, not having support around you is bad for anyone's mental health, let alone those of us who have mental health problems. So I hope I've made the case on why we need to address stigma and discrimination. It's bad for our own health and well-being, it's bad for our families, it's bad for our communities, and it's bad for our societies, and it's bad for our economies to exclude and judge the 1 in 4 of us in the UK who will have a mental health problem each year. To lecture over. Hopefully you understand why stigma is such an important issue to address. When we ask people with mental health problems, thousands and thousands of people in our networks, in where my program sits in England, these are the most common areas where people report stigma. From the people nearest to us, family, friends, social life, in work, in trying to get a date, even trying to start relationships, let alone in existing relationships. And when using health and mental health services, people feel discriminated against and stigma sits even within health services. I'm going to come on to that in a minute, but I'm sure you might have some questions. What does that mean? We've done a lot of qualitative research with people that have recently been in psychiatric care. By what do they mean by discrimination? Is it staff attitudes? Is it access to help? Is it not having the kind of help that you want? It's often a multitude of things when people say discrimination. It's not just staff attitudes. It can be a range of different things that people will interpret as discrimination. I'm sure that's going to be an area of debate and discussion in a minute. So as a programme, we are now in our 3rd programme of work until 2021. We are funded by the UK government, by our lottery. Who was it that mentioned the lottery ticket? So thanks to people playing the lottery in the UK, they funded our campaign from the outset. We couldn't have done all this work in England without lottery money. So I will buy one of your tickets if it goes to mental health. Stigma. I will definitely buy a ticket. So we got a big amount of money from the lottery, £16 million for the first 4 years. And then we had another 4 million. So this is when we started, way back in 2007. We had another 4 million from Comic Relief. Do you know the comedians with the red noses? They raise a lot of money for mental health and other work in the UK and in Africa. It's all the comedians, Lenny Henry, French and Saunders, those kind of people. So that money came together and helped us start this programme of work. Multiple millions of pounds needed to shift generations of stigma and discrimination. We were looking at New Zealand and our neighbours in Scotland who'd been running big multiple £1 million programmes for years and had shifted attitudes. So England was the third big programme. I see my duty as a global citizen to help any country in the world think about how you might shift stigma and discrimination, because we wouldn't have been able to do our campaign in England unless we had been able to look at what they'd done in New Zealand and what they'd done in Scotland. Anyway, what we are tasked to do, we're not a suicide prevention programme as such. We're not a programme that prevents mental health problems as such. These are all added values of our work. We are about improving how the public think about and, more importantly, behave towards those of us with mental health problems. So we have to evidence with very, very rigorous academic data every year across England that public attitudes have changed, but more importantly, people have reported less discrimination, so that lives are fuller and more inclusive. And the third thing we have to do is make sure that our work empowers those of us who are sharing our stories. I am one of them. I have had 2 breakdowns. Want to talk about that if you want. I've been very open about my breakdowns, depression, acute anxiety, and suicidal thoughts twice in my life now. But we have to make sure that when people are sharing their stories, just like the amazing champions you have working with Victoria, that it's safe, that it does positive good, not just for the attitudes of others, but that we gain from sharing our stories, that we are stronger from sharing our stories. And on that, I'm going to share with you our work now. So that's the objective. Some of the work we do changes in between years, but on the whole, these are the core approaches. So communities leading change. So we fund communities to run projects. Champions, which is, I'm waiting to meet some of your amazing champions with lived experience of mental health problems. Are there any here? The amazing 10? As well. Hello. Hi. 2. Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, we have 3. Great. 3 well, I hope you're very proud of yourselves, because you are the key ingredient for change. What you are doing is incredible. So we have about 5,000 adults in England that are sharing their stories. We train people. So we have a full-time member of staff in every region in England, 8 regions in England. Someone full-time to train champions. Then those champions train other champions, and the champions grow. And we also train 100 young people every year who have had depression, self-harm, anorexia, many, many things, bipolar, as young people. And they are trained to share their stories, often at university or a college. And they will go into our secondary schools, so our high schools, and share their stories in assemblies. And they are the most amazing young people I have ever met. They are, we have a phrase in England, when they speak, you can hear a pin drop. Everyone is listening. Amazing. And then we have social marketing, the big advertising campaign. use of social media, use of public relations, but yes, paid for advertising. We used to spend a lot more on advertising at the start because no one had ever seen a mental health campaign. Nobody knew stigma was an issue. Nobody wanted to talk about mental health. So we had to spend more on advertising in the early days. We still spend money on advertising, but a little bit less than we used to. As I said, we work with young people, with schools, with head teachers. After years and years of lobbying, our government in the UK has just agreed to put mental health on the school curriculum. All right. It's been so frustrating. It has taken such a long time. And many other countries in the world have the same problem. But we have finally got there. And then we work with employers, which I think is something that's really worth thinking about. And I'll be saying that tomorrow at the conference in front of government. We have had runaway success, huge interest. We can't cope with the amount of interest from employers in looking at the mental health of their workforce. I'll come on to that in a minute. But let me tell you a bit more about how we've began to change. We haven't finished the job, but how we've started to talk more openly about mental health in England and address stigma. I won't talk about it all, but we have been on a journey over 11 years with our public audience, people who don't have mental health problems. So we are not the audience, it's the population who are the target for this advertising. Everything we do is based on what the general public think about mental health, what the barriers for change are so that we can unpick them, and what they need to motivate them to change their thoughts, but more importantly, their behaviour towards those of us with mental health problems. We use very, very strict principles around social marketing. If you want to hear more, we can talk about that later. But what we found when we went into research with the general public, we looked at all the existing data. Attitudes have been measured in England since 1993, the same questions asked, so we have decades of data. What we found was that people still didn't understand the very basic things about mental health, that it's common, that it affects 1 in 4 of us, that we can work, that we can recover, that we're not axe-wielding murderers, and that we are in every family, every workplace. We are young, we are old, we are African Caribbean, we are white, we are gay, we are straight, we are la 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 la. It affects all of us. So we had to provide some very basic facts to challenge some of the myths and provide some basic facts. We had very famous people in our adverts. We had everyday people like us in our adverts. We then run an advert which tricks an audience into seeing our adverts. We have to do lots of things to get to audiences that don't want to see a campaign about mental health. So we have to ambush them, and we get behind them, and then we trick them into watching some of our adverts. We're doing that with men at the moment. Men are our core audience. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the advert I'll show you in a minute did really well with young men who would never watch an anti-stigma advert. And this was online and in cinemas. We called it Schizo the Movie. It is the only time we have ever used that one word, and it was done in a very contained way. I won't say more. I'll let you. We call it the light bulb moment. The light goes on, and oh, so they realise for themselves that their attitudes are stigmatising. So none of our adverts tell our audience off. None of them. None of them are about telling them they're wrong, telling them off. It's all about, we understand you, but you need to change. But they have to realise that they have to change. It's not for us to tell them off. So let me play you that advert in a minute, and then I'll share some of the other adverts. So then we had a talking theme. People were just too afraid to talk about mental health. If they thought someone was struggling, you would never be asked how you are. People would be so afraid of what would happen. So we use a bit of cheeky humour. We play on our audience's fears and say, come on, it's not that scary. So we use different tactics to get behind the barriers that people put up about mental health. And yeah, let's see if this works. If I can play you one of the ads. You okay up there, Anna? You right?
Oh look, Dave from accounts is back at work. He's been off for ages with some kind of mental illness. That's an awkward one. Should I say anything? I don't know how I react.
All right, Dave. Good to see you back, mate. How you feeling?
Can you hear that? Oh, you haven't seen it. Oh, you can't hear. She can't hear. Ah, yes, yes.
Oh look, Dave from accounts is back at work. He's been off for ages with some kind of mental...
No. Oh, Victoria, would it help? Because I'm going to show a few. If Anna or Polly came down into the room. Oh, you can hear? Anna, how about if you came down here and just interpret in front for the next couple of... I have another idea. How about if I talk over it and then you translate? Yeah. Should we give it a go?
David McCann's back at work. He's been off for ages with some kind of mental illness. That's an awkward one. Should I say it? How are you?
Right, Dave. Good to see you back. How am I feeling? Oh, yeah! Got some idiot here who's just asked me how I'm feeling! Feeling? So I've got to just stop playing. Feeling? Shit. No worries.
Well done, Anna. We play another one. Let's keep going so that then we can swap this around. So then this advert, just to show you how things can translate across countries and cultures. I do some work with Glenn Close, a movie star whose sister has bipolar, nephew has schizoaffective disorder, what it's called in the US. And she wanted to borrow this ad because she feels very bad about Hollywood stereotypes since her role in Fatal Attraction didn't help. So we let them borrow this ad and they tested it with American audiences and then shot the back end of it differently. So I'm going to play you the English version. This is the light bulb, Schizo the movie light bulb moment. And then I'll play you the American one. Anna, there's only speaking at the... Well, you might need to translate a little bit at the beginning. Let's see.
Hi there. Sorry to disappoint you. You were expecting to arrive at some sort of front page. My name is Stuart and I was diagnosed with schizophrenia 12 years ago. People like me with diagnosis of mental illness may see this information today. Luckily for me, I had the support of friends and family who helped me lead a full life.
Is it time to change?
Okay, so young men in particular clicked on that because they thought it was a horror movie advert, and then through the process of that, they were like, "Oh, there's anything wrong that thinking mentally ill people are all schizos with knives, as they might say." And so you trick them, and they watch it, and they realise in the space of just 2 short minutes that their thinking might not be helpful. So then this is the American version. Oh, let's look at that. Oh no, we haven't. Sorry, haven't got the American version. You have to look at that online. So I think what we will do is, should we just carry on like this? Sound out. Is that better? So if anybody is interested in working with young people to address young people's attitudes, we started with adults, we carry on with adults. Can you hear? And can you hear okay? Oh, I am going to play a couple. Anna, should we just play all the videos together? No, let's do that. Then we'll go back to. Okay, so what we're going to do is play the latest adverts that have moved on. So this is where we're focusing on what we call the cold men. And sorry, men in the audience. There are lots of warm men. But when we say cold men, we mean men that don't think mental health is at all relevant in their lives. So mental health, they don't know anyone. They'll never struggle. So they are an audience who hasn't changed. So we are focusing our advertising on them. This advert took a year to develop and test, develop and retest, and then develop and retest. So it's aimed at men with a lower income bracket, more working class men, not men in offices. And just to say, we've had the best behaviour change with men doing what we're asking them to do than any other advert in 10 years. So we're asking men not to talk about mental health. We're asking them to step in for a, very British, but a mate, for a friend, to step in and be there for them. So I'll play you this, a very, very male advert.
Whoa. How John White's zero. Yeah. So that. Cheers, mate. Right, John. Right, boys. One performance will fight mental health problems this year. We're not really like fun get meeting you got. Make all the difference. So you're acting different. Step in. Here we go now, the bell's down. So it's time to change.
Okay, so we are not asking men to talk. They won't talk about mental health in the same way warm men or women will. We're asking them to step in for a mate. And that worked also really, really well with young people who can be very, very judgmental of other young people who are struggling mentally. In the UK, 1 in 10 young people, so we say 3 people in every classroom, 3 children will have a mental health problem. We work in about 2,000 high schools. We'll talk about that later. But this idea of being in a mate's corner works really well with young people because friendship is so important to young people. So asking them to be a good friend and not to judge a friend or a fellow pupil who has a mental health problem. We had even better results to this than we did to the male ad. Something like 60% of young people who saw the advert have stepped in already. That's a very quick behaviour change. So let me play you this. Just do interpreters. This is a bit of a London Cockney accent on this one. It's a bit London. So it's got a bit of an accent.
1 in 10 young people will experience a mental health problem this year. It's active. Be where they're sad.
So he's singing Twinkle Twinkle, 2 funky young guys sorry about the sound, but the principle is be by their side, be by their side. And young people respond really well to that. I'm going to switch back to normal now. Thank you, well done. Is that better? Ooh. Can you hear me now through your... Is that okay? Okay. Okay, so young people's attitudes matter, adult attitudes matter, employer attitudes and behaviour matters. So we now have 1,000 employers who are pledged to our campaign. They can't just tick something. We did mental health last week. We've done that. It's a solid commitment, ongoing commitment to look after all of the workforce's mental health and well-being. Not just the 1 in 4 of us, but everyone. And that is because it makes business sense and they have a duty of care to their staff, but also because society has started to change. So their workers see our adverts at home. Their workers want to speak out. We have, I think we now have 3,000 champions in workplaces, in our banks, in our football clubs, Ford, in our car manufacturers, in chocolate manufacturers, even in energy suppliers, even in our media are pledged. ITV is our big commercial station. Sky, I'm sure you've heard of Sky TV, they are pledged. So we have a huge movement of employers focusing on mental health and reducing stigma in the workplace. We have a massive following on social media. Some things get very quickly addressed through people on social media campaigning if somebody says something or does something stigmatizing. But it's also very, very powerful, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, for our peer network of champions to feel that you're part of a big group taking action. You're not the only one. You're not the only voice standing up to stigma. And one thing I was going to quickly touch on is that, as I said earlier, people with mental health problems will report stigma and discrimination even when they're using health and mental health services. So what we decided as a program is that we would do some pilot work, 2 small pieces of work, with 2 of our mental health providers in South England and North England. And we worked with, staff came on to a day's training. They were allowed to leave the psychiatric ward, or if they're in the community team, they left that team for 1 day to spend with us. And the objectives were to improve their attitudes, ultimately to improve the outcomes of their patients, and to promote a bit of reflection on their own practice. So were there things they were doing that would be causing stigma them to their own client base? Things like simple things. I never forget, an amazing woman wrote a book about 20 years ago who had psychosis. She had schizophrenia. And she won I work for Mind, the mental health charity, and she won a Mind Book of the Year. We do Book of the Year, Journalists of the Year. They're massive awards. And she won Book of the Year about 20 years ago. And she said it's just simple things that make us feel different, like blue cups for the patients and pink cups for the staff, as if drinking from the same cup is going to spread mental illness. That's how it made her feel. So sometimes it's little things like that that can make a big difference. But if you don't hear that that's a problem, how are you going to try and improve things? You need to talk to each other. So we did some work based on the following. We did forum theatre. Have you heard of forum theatre? Where there's a scenario played out on stage, and then they say, right, now we're going to play this differently, and you in the audience are going to take some of those roles and tell us how we can do it differently. And that worked really well to allow people to change the scenario. We had personal testimonies from people that had used the services saying this was good and this wasn't so good. So it's not all about what's not working, it's also what is working and what we want to see more of. And then we had staff tell their stories about their challenges, their stresses, their workloads, how things might be done that way because of certain things, but how we can work together to change it. So the model that we had is based on sort of three key elements: restorative justice, appreciative inquiry, where you can ask each other open questions and respect each other's perspective, and a dialogue model. So it's all about sharing perspectives across both audiences. It's all constructive. Nobody gets told off. It's like, how can we do more good together? That's the way we put it. And then we evaluate staff attitudes when people sign up, when people leave the course, and then 3 to 6 months later. And we had some really good improvements in attitudes. And more importantly, we had some really good examples of some small things that staff put in place when they went back to the ward or back to the community team. Just small things that made a big difference. So we wanted to see if we could achieve change with mental health professionals, and it is possible, but I don't raise £24 million to do the work with mental health professionals. We say that we have a model and some training and some evidence. We need our NHS, who are the employers, to take it on and do something with it. We need the ownership to sit with the employers of health professionals and mental health professionals. So just finally, to make sure we have time for questions, how do we know things are shifting in England? Well, we spend more money on evaluation than any other campaign in the world. We know that attitudes have shifted by 9.6% since we started. That's not all down to us. Since we started, we used to be the only anti-stigma campaign. Now there are masses of them. Everyone is doing, not everyone, lots of people are doing stigma, including the royal family. I wonder if we can get your royal family to talk about mental health and stigma. So we have Prince Harry. So I've had the privilege of working with them. So Prince Harry has talked about having had counselling. Is that somebody with a royal connection in the room? No. Okay. So he said he had counselling. The Duke of Cambridge, William, spoke yesterday at an employers' event on mental health, and he said he's like a pilot for an air ambulance. So he goes to road traffic accidents, and he said it's been traumatising for his mental health. It's the first time he's talked about his own. So he has seen children injured in road accidents, and since he's become a father, he says he finds that difficult to cope with mentally. So he is opening up as well. So lots of people have realised that they can do their bit on stigma. So this is the most evidence anywhere in the world that attitudes have positively shifted. Lots of academic papers being published about it. What's more important is that we've seen less discrimination reported by people who have recently used services. So less discrimination from family, less from friends, less when dating, less when seeking work, and less in work. That doesn't mean the job is done, but it means we've made some progress. I'll skip through some of this. The average level of discrimination, and this is where we interview 1,000 people in England in touch with 5 mental health services. So every year, 1,000 people with severe mental health problems. We ask them about 19 areas of life where they might experience discrimination. And this is where it's gone down from an average of 42% to 26%. There is no evidence in the world that matches this. So we know that people's lives have improved. That still doesn't mean that there's no discrimination. It does mean that life has improved for some. We also know, even though this isn't our purpose of our campaign, but we know that people are now saying, if they're aware of our campaign, they are more likely to seek help and disclose to a family doctor, to friends and family, or to their employer if they are struggling. So we know that we have encouraged more help seeking. We've done lots of reviews. We look at all the evaluation data. We look at what other people are doing in other types of discrimination, race, gender, ethnicity, homophobic, anti-homophobic programs. And we always review who we should be talking to and what we're going to do next. As I said earlier, we look at all of the data, and this shows you the difference with women, with the maroony red line, and men, who are the blue line. So both men and women's attitudes have changed, but men are still behind women. So that's why we're now trying to get men to catch up. I've shown you some of these adverts. We have a national day of talking about mental health. That's Prince Harry when he came to our day of talking to one of our employers. That's the London Ambulance Service. And 2 men that had talked there about their mental health problems with colleagues. He is actually more handsome in real life than you would imagine. And I haven't met Meghan Markle yet, but I am waiting for my invite. But we have thousands of employers, thousands of schools, thousands of people that come together on one day. And this day has become international. So we have Hong Kong do Time to Talk Day, and we have Denmark doing Time to Talk Day. I would love the Balearic Islands to do Time to Talk Day with us next year. It's always the same Thursday every February. We get the whole nation talking. We have our Prime Minister speaks, the 3 party leaders speak, our celebrities speak, our business leaders speak, and everyday people like us speak. And schools do something on this day as well. So I would call to action to get you involved in that day. It's becoming more global. Obviously, we have a theory of change. Why do we do what we do? How does that help us reach our outcomes? You shouldn't be doing something if it's not going to support your programme objectives. This is the evaluation we do. Talk more about that. This is, you are a member through Victoria and through Salut Mental work. You are members of the global movement against stigma. Somewhere? That might be an old slide. You can see it's very global north, apart from Australia and New Zealand. So I've just become the global director, and we have money to work in Commonwealth countries now to start to run some very small, tiny campaigns in Africa and India. So can we shift attitudes in very, very, very different contexts, where there's 1 psychiatrist to 1 million people in Kenya? Imagine how we're going to shift attitudes. But because mental health is global, I say, and sadly so is stigma global. Very few cultures don't stigmatise mental health. We're not saying we have the answers in our Western world, but we have some ingredients, and they will be adapted and delivered by local champions with mental health problems who we're starting to train in Africa and India, who will share their stories, because you are the secret ingredient for change. And we say, wherever you live in the world, you shouldn't be made to feel worthless, isolated, or ashamed because of your mental health problem. Thank you very much for your time. That's my Twitter. It will be in English, I'm afraid. So does anybody have questions? Are you okay, translators at the back? You're doing a great job. Okay, so I can't believe I'm going to get off with no questions. There you go. Gentleman with your mic.
Hola.
Hola.
La pregunta era, os focalizáis mucho en el estigma y las actitudes del estigma, pero ¿trabajáis también el autoestigma? Es decir, esa interiorización de esos valores negativos por parte de la persona que los sufre.
Yes, good question. In fact, I was doing a radio interview at lunchtime here about it. I had a lot of self-stigma when I had my first breakdown. Yes, we do. Mostly through our champions work. So we develop people will identify that it's stigma that's affected them and then come on board and share their stories. So that's a bit of what we do. Quite a lot of what we will do online. The most popular part of our website are blogs where people are sharing their stories and talking about how stigma wasn't just external, it was also internal, and help people overcome the self-stigma, the judgment of yourself. And it's often hearing from other people who will talk about their self-stigma that helps people realize, it's something that we need to address. A lot of the peer support work we do with champions is really helpful as well. So people will support each other on their journey. We don't have a campaign. We don't pay to reach people with mental health problems with our advertising. Our advertising is for the general public. But I think it's hearing from other people who have been on that journey that helps people feel less ashamed and stop judging themselves. We don't have a dedicated program. Quite a lot of the work that Mind will do in local services will be about addressing that. One thing we do have to make sure is I talk about our campaign like two sides of the same coin. So this bit changes the public attitudes, and that bit empowers those of us with mental health problems to speak out and not put up with stigma. And part of that is how we feel about ourselves. So if you remember, one of our big objectives was empowering those of us with mental health problems. So it has to help us feel better about ourselves. So that is one of our objectives. Self-stigma is so powerful. It's so powerful.
Y tenía una segunda pregunta, y era, esta es un poco más friki, ¿no? Estoy muy interesado en los temas estos. Y era para saber si en las diferentes evaluaciones que habéis hecho, la percepción de estigma que tienen las personas está más dirigida a su clase social o de manera individual. Y por otro lado, si esa percepción es una percepción sutil o es una percepción directa.
Okay, let me just clarify. So is that, how do we measure the empowerment of people with lived experience? Or yes, partly that? Oh.
No, era la percepción que tienen las personas que son estigmatizadas, si esa percepción es hacia su clase social o si es una percepción individual propia de la persona. y también si esa percepción es que sienten, o sea, lo estigmatizan de manera sutil, por ejemplo lo que has dicho de las tazas, que hay una taza azul y rosa dependiendo de quién la tome, o si una percepción directa, es decir, tú tienes una enfermedad mental y no te discrimina directamente.
Okay. I'll try and answer that.
I know it's a difficult question.
I think it's how it. Yeah, I'll try. So, one of the things that we measure in the discrimination survey, we don't do it this way anymore, but the 1,000 people who were asked about discrimination, what they have experienced and what they report. So that is their own understanding. It's their view of whether someone has treated them differently because they have a mental health problem. So the question is, I mean, they are all people with mental health problems because they have recently used psychiatric services. So the question is, due to your mental health diagnosis, do you feel you've been treated unfairly in any of the following ways? So it's their interpretation. So they tell us whether they feel they face discrimination in housing, in benefits. That's the only one that's gone in the wrong direction. From mental health professionals, from health professionals, from family, from friends, from religious groups, in dating, from workplaces, using public transport. So it's as simple as that. We don't go into any more detail. It's quite a top line set of data. But what we did do is we went into additional analysis of 100 of those responses and got into more depth, into more detail. So that's when we found out what people meant by discrimination from mental health professionals. It wasn't just staff attitudes, it was also lack of access to care, having to wait a long time for care, not having the choice of treatment. So discrimination was actually a multiple of things and defined by people differently. So behind the headlines is an awful lot more complexity when people talk about discrimination. But it is based on them having a diagnosed mental health problem. So it's attached to that, and that's why they feel they're being discriminated against. I think it's also fair to say that people felt discriminated by other people with mental health problems. It's not all staff to patient, it was patient to patient as well. It's complex. I wonder if there's one interesting thing to share, which is when we looked into the detail, we found out the factors that made discrimination more likely. So the people that would be more likely to experience discrimination were when people were sectioned, they had higher reports of discrimination. That's probably linked to that experience. When people had a diagnosis of personality disorder, it wasn't schizophrenia, it was personality disorder that had the highest levels. And the longer they stayed in hospital, the longer the stay in hospital was, the higher the levels of reported discrimination. So it may be fair to make an assumption, it's only an assumption, the more people are coerced, the more people are long-term patients, the higher their interpretation of discrimination is. And just one final thing which might answer your question in the first place. The level of anticipated discrimination was always higher than the actual experience of discrimination. So people feared it more than it happened. So that is about how you expect it to be. Okay, it's a long answer. Any more questions? Thoughts? Things you want to share? Anybody know anybody in the royal family? You have a question.
Yo quería preguntar sobre estas actitudes. No conozco a nadie de la familia. No me apetece mucho tampoco, pero quería, pero quería preguntar sobre estas actitudes discriminatorias del personal de salud. ¿Qué cambios en positivo habéis visto vosotros después de todo este tiempo de trabajo? ¿Qué actitudes han cambiado en positivo del personal de salud?
Just a reminder, we're not running a big program focused on staff. We only did 2 tiny pilots, so that it's not nationwide. It's only a handful, few hundred people. There's a massive cultural problem here where some people in the mental health sector, even people high up, will say, yes, we have a problem. We need to be more respectful. We need to be more supportive. There is a problem with attitudes with some staff, not all. Other people high up in the mental health and health sector will say there is no problem. Until there's a uniform agreement that an ownership of the issue, there isn't going to be big change. So we use the money I have to raise from the lottery and Comic Relief and the government to just test what is it possible? And it was. But we're not spending our money teaching mental health professionals how to be more respectful. That needs to come from the profession. And it needs to come from the leaders to say, there's more we can do. It's not to say that all staff have bad attitudes. It's to say, are there things we could do that would be better for our patients ultimately and more empowering? Some people want to get rid of coercion because they think that's the worst thing. Some people just say it's small changes that make a big difference. So things like focusing on recovery, having a conversation about life when you leave hospital. So it's more than just symptom management. It's not just are you ill or better. It's having aspirations for people in your care to make friends, to get a job, to expect support from family and friends, not to have such a small view of what life is like living with a mental illness. As big movements, I'm sure it's present here, big movements that are recovery orientated services. So they're focused on recovery, not just symptom management. So then that's not just about staff attitudes, that's about the whole system moving to recovery focused perspective. In England, I'm sure some of you will have heard about it, we have things called recovery colleges, which is all about people learning new skills, undertaking courses, so that as you deal with your mental health problem, you're also building yourself up for life afterwards. I think every service should have a recovery college. It's just a thought. But yes, attitudes did change. People were more respectful. People talked about recovery. People weren't dismissed or seen as attention-seeking or absorbing too much time wasters. I mean, you can get language like that. For example, in one of the most common areas in health is in accident and emergency. So ambulance comes in, somebody has tried to take their life, and they get horrific attitudes back from emergency staff. You're wasting our time. Why don't you just go and kill yourself properly? Things like that are said to someone that's just tried to take their life. It's not acceptable. That's just an example, an extreme example. So there is work to do. In Denmark, they have a really good training program. They have all of the psychiatric professional groups supporting them. So there's none of this half agree and half don't. They all agree that there needs to be more work on staff attitudes, and they're rolling out a really good program with mental health professionals. Not telling everybody off, working with people to make those small changes that can make a big difference. So Denmark has a very good program, much more advanced than England. Any more questions? Thoughts? A bit more time. You might be able to give your ears and the translators a break. If you want to know more, if you put into a Google search "time to change," you'll see all of our adverts, all of our data, all of our supporters. You can follow Time to Change on Twitter or me. But thank you so much for your time and attention. And thanks to our translators and to the IT man. We got there in the end. Thank you.